All right. Cans on. Mic's up. Level's good. You got me over there? All right. Let's roll.
This is Booth to Booth, your direct line to the latest in home voiceover production, with your favorite home VO experts throughout the industry, across the internet, and all around the world. Booth to Booth is brought to you by the Narrowband Broadcast Network, NBBN. The focus is on you. By Andrew Scott Media, making your media matter. By Booth Stuff, unique VO fashion and swag that's as loud and proud as you are. And by the kind support of our viewers and listeners all around the world via KOFI. KOFI, helping you give back to the creators that help you the most. The session clock is running and all the mics are hot. So let's patch in and get this session started. Here's your host, VO coach, narrator, and producer, Andrew Scott.
Hello, and welcome back to Booth to Booth. I am your host, Andrew Scott. And things are a little bit weird here in voiceover land. I don't have to explain to you that it feels like we're headed for uncharted waters when it comes to home narration and voice work, and all the news recently about artificial intelligence and a bunch of new platforms coming online that are kind of blowing everybody's mind. And so I really felt like I wanted to speak with somebody who could speak to this from a more learned place than I am. I've been a nerd for my whole life, but there's way more that I don't know about artificial intelligence than do. And I felt like it was time for the voiceover community to maybe hear from an expert. We've had all this news coming out about generative AI and platforms like Descript and 11 Labs and companies like Apple and Amazon / Audible and Google coming out and pretty much saying, we want to replace certain voice talents with artificial intelligence and generative AI voices. And, for many people, that's a scary proposition. There's absolutely no question about that. And I feel like it's time that we hear from a real expert on the subject. And so in just a moment, I'm going to switch over to an interview I did a few weeks ago with Professor Joanna Bryson. Now, Professor Bryson holds 2 degrees in both artificial intelligence and psychology. And she is, since 2020, the Professor of Ethics and Technology at the Hertie School in Berlin, Germany. And Professor Bryson advises governments on artificial intelligence and was very kind to cut me some time. Now, before we go to this interview, I do have to preface this by saying that she stayed pretty high view on this. She was looking at this from a very macro point of view, but I do believe, especially in the second half of this interview, that she makes some very good points that I think we in the VO world can benefit from. And then after we're done with that interview, I will be joined once again by your friend and mine, Mike Delgaudio, YouTube's Booth Junkie, and we're going to perform a little bit of an after action on this interview and talk a little bit between ourselves about where we think artificial intelligence is headed as far as narration goes, and more importantly, where we feel artificial intelligence is taking us as an industry. So stick around for that, but here's my interview with Professor Bryson. Where do you feel that we are heading by way of particularly voice synthesis when it comes to generative AI? And, we're starting to see impacts now, but what are you prognosticating as being some of the initial growing pains of this new era that we're stepping into?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me and asking me these hard questions. And I have to admit that I'm not a huge expert in text to speech. I know something about it, and I've been
Sure.
I've been a keynote speaker at a couple meetings on it, but it's not my own area of research.
Okay.
Nevertheless, I think, so what I'm saying is going to be sort of true for the rest of generative AI. And from the sympathy of someone who has been a rock and roller at some point in their past, so knows something about, I mean, and I don't want to understate that. It's not, if you look at what it meant historically to be a musician, right? And how that changed when we had radio and when we had television and we could sell records. And then, of course, what happened was the music. So for a while, selling records and indeed selling sheet music was a way to make a lot of money as a creative that you couldn't make by directly going out there. And then the industry sort of changed that. Maybe after the Beatles quit touring or something, they decided, no, we need to make it so you guys only make money if you tour. And basically that has happened, right? So
that's exactly right.
Not everyone will spend all their time going to hear live music. Some people say, no, I want to hear the Beatles over and over and over in the original version, and I don't want to go hear like some aging Paul McCartney or some wannabe Beatles band, or, you know, God forbid, somebody playing new music, right? That's not what I want. At the same time, I would hazard a guess that there may actually be more musicians making more money, partly just because we're all so much richer than we ever have been. It's really hard to compare. I mean, our ordinary lives now are comparable to what millionaires' lives were a century ago.
Right.
You know, in most ways, except for like the social, you know, like the apex of the social.
We're not saying there's no gap. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we can't all be at the apex, and we can't do that. I suspect that in general, what AI is doing, and I don't want to say just AI is not the actor. What we're doing with AI, or what corporations are doing with AI, is making a whole lot of skills more accessible. And so the challenge of that, the great thing about that is that people who could never have dreamed about making movies or whatever, or that, you know, didn't have great jobs or voices or whatever, so you can help a lot of people with a lot of different levels of ability produce something. And then the people who are super creative and super talented or just popular for some other reason will get a lot of attention anyway, and maybe they'll make more money than they've ever made because they can be more efficient. And the real question is what happens on that gradient in between that. So are people, you know, discriminating enough, well-educated enough to spot the best stuff still, or will they somehow waste their time hanging out with other people from either, you know, the international online community or just their friends, you know, watching all their friends that they actually know what they produce. So I'm telling my colleagues that I think for us, not for all of the world, but for those of us in higher education, this is going to be like another year like 2020. It's like just radical change because of technology, but that will land somewhere because people want there to be universities. People want to have someone they can telephone and say, you know how to put together good programs, could you put one together for me, right? So we will land somewhere, but it might be a very different place than we expected. And then people from outside are going to look and say, you know, markets will read this and go, oh, wow, we didn't know, you know. And there was the ridiculous overinvestment in tech that has now, you know, that trickled back out again when people just said, oh my gosh, the economy didn't fall over. That must mean we've undervalued tech. Like, well, no, anyway. So I think there's going to be a lot of disruption this year, and all I can say is I hope, you know, I hope people have are investing and putting pads aside for themselves, and that we'll work with our governments to try to make sure that we help people, but that overall we should be much more productive, and so we need to figure out ways both to differentiate ourselves, to continue to find ways to find meaning in our work, but also to demonstrate value of our work to society.
I'd like to kernelize a few things that you brought up because, you know, from the macro level, I agree entirely with you. And, you know, I'm a special case in that when it comes to generative AI and or AI assistance, I'm a disabled man. I had an disabling accident when I was 15 years old. I have partial paralysis, and disability advocacy is something that's really important to me. And some of the places that I see generative AI being of a massive help is in the field of disability assistance, and not only disability assistance, but the generative and creative process. How many people have been kept out of my industry, voice acting, because while they might be able to talk, they might have absolutely limited use of hands and don't have the requisite assistive physical technology in order to do long form editing of something like an audiobook. I foresee a day very soon where you will literally just be able to put an audio file into a generative AI engine and tell it, I need it to be deployed on Amazon and or Audible. I need it to be X length. I need it to be this kind of intonation and pacing. That's a positive. But where I see a lot of fear being generated right now is in exactly people like me. I am a mid-tier voiceover professional. I've been doing this full-time for 10 years. I've done numerous audiobooks, and I can see, Apple's statement when they essentially, and they put it out in a very cagey way. As the old saying goes, this would have been page 17 of your newspaper down on the bottom by the ads. They came out and said, well, we're doing this because we're going to be doing material and titles that, nobody wants to narrate. Nobody wants to narrate the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, all 18 volumes of it. The truth of the matter is, yes, they do. If you were to be able to, you would be able to pay them a reasonable wage per finished hour. I, right now, without even having to email somebody, can come up with at least 5 people who would take that job. So, what we're being told by the developers and the corporations versus what the boots on the ground kind of results are going to differ. But then again, they always do. What I'm very worried about, though, aside from some of the ethical issues that are entangled in this, like, when they were doing speech training, was the voice talent that was hired to help do speech training, were they fully informed that this was going to be used for generative AI? Or were they told something to the effect of, we're doing research on voice recognition software? That kind of dynamic. But really where I'm trying very hard is to get people in my industry to understand that, Moore's law is still in effect. As a matter of fact, it's probably been condensed to one degree or another. It's not every 2 years now. It's about every 6 to 8 months, because we're not talking about the size of a semiconductor path. We are talking about new algorithms that self-generate and teach themselves how to be better algorithms at learning. A little bit, please correct me on that.
Yeah, no, so to some extent, that is how we're using the machine learning. On the other hand, if you're talking about human-to-human kinds of things, there's a concept in biology called supernormal stimulus about, there's, something that like nature would never have invented, so it just goes off the scale for you.
Right.
But basically, there's only so good that you can be. There's only so much value you're going to get from all that. At some point, you get something that's pretty human-like, and then you really can't go beyond that too much. So I think it isn't. I still think that's why I'm saying that the fundamental things are the dynamics about how do people want to spend their time, and I really think, I hate this use of the word democratizing, but really I think the threat is that we're democratizing all these things that it used to be that people with special skills were getting a lot of rewards for. And now probably still a few people with very special skills will get a lot of rewards for it. But quite a lot of other people will just do it themselves if they can be bothered. Of course, people do still specialize in lots of ways. And that,
right.
All those old examples of that. The main people that AI have put out of work, to my knowledge, are the journalists. And that wasn't because we got better reporters. It was because we took all the advertising money and gave it to Google and Facebook. But nevertheless, I think that sort of masked over the fact that it is a totally different job to do copy editing now. And a lot of people just go with what machines do. A lot of online papers don't care if it's not that great. Even you see errors in the Guardian that didn't used to be in the Guardian or in the Post. There have been people like that. And also translators. Translators have been casualized. I don't think that their wages have come down that much, but they no longer can demand so again, their position has been weakened. So they can no longer demand a full-time permanent contracts. They're down to hours.
Right. It's the uniqueness of your skill set versus the availability or possibly the ubiquity of a solution that doesn't require the level of fidelity that a human being might provide. We only have a few more minutes left before I have to let you go, but really I want to get down to a simple question, and I understand it's not exclusively in your wheelhouse, but you are definitely more knowing than I am in this regard. I already have an opinion. How long do you think it will take before there is a generative artificial intelligence whose recorded output is indistinguishable from human speech?
See, this is what I was talking about before about the informativeness of your audience. That's already happened. There's all in the 2016 election, I remember people not being sure if they're hanging up on humans or hanging up on robocalls, right? And now the EU is making that illegal, right? So with the AI Act, you have to identify if you're talking to something that's AI. So the point is that the real question is how many people will be able to discriminate, and it's going to get to the point where eventually none can, maybe, or maybe a few experts can do it with tools. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I still think that the industry will still hold itself together in some ways, but it is going to be different because as you say, when you're mid-level or low level, the kinds of things that the ways you were able to find work, that stuff may all get automated. It is more about then what are the extra services that you can provide, and is it worth your time doing that as your source of labor? Or are you kind of doing the barista thing for a while and looking for the next thing to do?
Or finding those things that only you can do that AI can't, at least right now at the level you're at.
Well, there's some things and so we're talking about this with ChatGPT, right? Mm-hmm. Coming out and choosing an expert that people have heard of and talking to them, right? That's not something you're going to get from just mining. You could mine my previous works, sure. And that's what's happened with Dan Dennett, and that's like a big deal that people, you can train it on what he's already written, and then get something that sounds like he used to sound. But you can't necessarily find something that would say what he would say now, knowing what he just found out yesterday. And so that's something that I think that those kinds of things are things that might be available.
Yeah, because that's something that somebody brought up to me today. They had said, I'd never heard progress on AI's problem of how to automate the handling of metatextual elements of speech, meaning, they can, as you said, they can reference what's been taught to them in the past, but they can't prognosticate about the context of something, what it might mean to somebody in the future, the way we as human beings can.
I'm sorry, but I wouldn't hang your hopes on that. Again, think about the Amazon recommender systems.
And that's exactly what I was
trying to point that out, it'll be someone's challenge.
Right, exactly. As soon as somebody thinks of it as a problem, somebody picks it up as a challenge. And that's exactly what I'm trying to get through to people, is that if you don't think, everybody's judging about how it's happening now, what its quality level is now. And they're not taking into account the speed of change. And this is not a logarithmic thing. This is going to be, at least in some part, exponential, at least until a point where it hits a level. And I'm trying to get people to understand that this isn't a nexus point. This is a sea change. And like you had referenced 2022, for people in your world in academia, this is the earth shaking right now to one degree or another. And for people
I was talking about the COVID and the online teaching, how we just shifted all our work. Right. Yeah, 2022 is obviously the Zeitwende for international affairs, which is my next meeting I should be in.
Well, and I was just going to say, I'm just going to let you go. But Professor Bryson, I deeply appreciate you taking a brief moment to talk to us. And sure. It's going to be a very interesting next couple of years. But again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Is.
And thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot too, and it's really good to have these conversations. And I still think this is our hope, is that we will be putting together things that we care about.
I hope your hope is right. Thank you again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Booth to Booth is brought to you in part by BoothStuff.com, the home of the world's most unique VO casual fashion and swag. This thing that we do is pretty unique. So, slap on a Booth Stuff t-shirt that tells the world, or, your cat, that being in a tiny room by yourself is where you truly belong. Shirts, hats, pants, mugs, and more. Well, not a lot more. Actually, that's pretty much it. Anyway, Booth Stuff is the one and only home for VO-centric swag that lets the world know what you do with that mouth of yours. So, head on over to boothstuff.com and get something that shows the world who you are and what you love to do. Boothstuff.com. Loud and proud.
And hello and welcome back to Booth to Booth. I am now joined by everybody's favorite Mike on the mics, Mike Delgaudio. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Andrew. How are you?
Good. Interesting times, though.
It certainly is. It certainly is interesting times.
You know, I want to start off with something that I kind of gleaned from that interview with Professor Joanna Bryson. And that is, you know, whenever anything like this happens, anything, name your niche or your technology, whenever something suddenly changes, there's a disruption. I mean, I often use the analogy of, one of the number one jobs in the world back at the turn of the 20th century was picking up horse manure on the streets of New York. And you know, within a few years of the release of the Model T, one of the number one jobs in New York was working at the glue factory to take care of all the horses that were no longer driving cabs around.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's a fear that we all have a little bit. Anytime unwanted and uninvited change shows up, we get nervous. And especially if that change is aimed or aiming itself at your direction.
Sure.
And, you know, we've both done audiobooks. You know, admittedly, audiobooks is a bit more my bag than yours. But by way of long-form narration, you and I have both done a lot of work for things like YouTube videos and explainer videos and all this stuff. And I'm wondering what are you sensing right now in your world by way of this coming shift? Has it touched you yet? Has it gotten into your bubble, or where are you with it so far?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely had an effect. It's changed my work. It's changed the work that I'm available for. I expect that it's going to continue to change the work.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, you know, you mentioned e-learning, industrial narration. I think so much of that stuff is going to end up going to the AI.
Yeah.
You know, I just foresee that that's going to happen, which is unfortunate because there's so many, for many people, that's how you learn your craft a bit.
That's where you cut your teeth. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see how new people become better at their craft. And it may end up going the same way that music went, right? You know, if we went back to when you and I were kids, everybody wanted to learn how to play guitar.
Right.
I don't think that's the case now. But there's still lots of people who want to make music, but they're using vastly different instruments and vastly different techniques. And I can see that may end up being the same thing that happens to people who want to speak into a microphone for whatever that means to them, that it's going to end up being something potentially drastically different.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you brought up music, and I think that's a really good point to look at. And Dr. Bryson actually mentioned that as well. You know, every single development in musical dissemination or musical creation has gone through a transformation via technology, you know, and Dr. Bryson mentioned, you know, back in the day when it was cylinders and 78s, you know, the cylinder and 78 people were a threat to the music publishing and sheet music people. And then, of course, you know, the advent of cassettes, and that killed off the LPs, and then the advent of CDs, and so on and so on and so on. But where I'm at with this, and I'm trying to find rays of light while not sounding like a Pollyanna. because this is going to impact our particular industry. We are some of the first people. We are out on the front lines of this by way of where the impact is going to be felt. And really, for me, the good news is that one of the biggest growing segments of music buying right now is LPs, is good old vinyl acetate again. And generally speaking, there's a loop that happens, and everything old is new again, and so on and so on. I kind of have this analogy that I refer to as artisan pickles. You know, back when we were kids, right? You had Vlasic and then the crap that your local pickler got into the stores, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we all ate those pickles, and I'm pretty sure we all turned out to be fine. But around about the 80s, 90s, you started seeing farmers markets again. And then you started seeing that hippie dude sitting under a tie-dyed tent selling you his artisan pickles. And you tried one and wow, this is different. It might not necessarily be qualitatively better, but it's different and I like it. And I feel good about helping this guy out by buying his product.
Sure.
And I'm kind of wondering if maybe there's going to be some of that happening. There's always going to be people that prefer the human voice. And even if they don't know, and this is an interesting point that Dr. Bryson made, even if they don't know that the voice that they're listening to is synthesized, they might have a preference to support a human voice doing the same job.
Yeah, they certainly might.
And so I'm kind of wondering if we're going to be headed there, but some of the bad things, you and I both
it'll probably only take 20 years or 30 years for that to happen, to come around again.
On my deathbed, I'll be able to say, oh, look, human voices are valued again. You and I both had the dubious distinction of having had our voices cloned without our permission, without our expressed consent.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the impact points that I am most worried about, is people running off with your voice.
And I think that goes way, way beyond just voice acting. Yes, it was voice actors. This is an asset that we can't change. We've trained and honed this instrument to do what it is that we do with our voice. And yes, it's going to disrupt. It's gotten too easy. And I think even the ethics of claimed by the companies are going to take a long time to catch up to what's actually going to happen. But I was just reading an article today. Was it in Vox or somebody, where they used everybody's favorite right now, 11 Labs. They created a bunch of text, but they used the synthetic voice to get past the gate, to get into their bank account.
Yeah.
So they were able to use that to get past the voice print ID and all that stuff. So there are, ramifications throughout until people really understand that, in the same way that you won't be able to trust somebody's face as a deep fake, you won't be able to trust somebody's voice as a deep fake, you won't be able to trust somebody on the phone because it'll be a deep fake. It's going to storm around for a while, especially as these tools progressively get better and less distinguishable. It's getting ever harder to distinguish deep fakes, and certainly for voice fakes, it will definitely get much, much harder.
Absolutely. And, for me, so much of this gets laid at the door of these developers who, and there's an old saying that there's never been a technology in the history of mankind that hasn't gone to its logical conclusion. Because as monkeys, we don't like leaving unfinished work. We don't like untapped or unmet potential. So there's always going to be somebody who's pushing this forward.
Well, and what's really interesting about it is I think this is the first time that the developers themselves are actually starting to get a sense of, oh my goodness, ChatGPT can actually do a lot of the work that I do.
Right.
You actually see, some of the conversations I watch developers worrying about AI replacing them. So it's the confluence of the video AI, the generative text, and the generative voice it's really going to change a bunch. And I think for the first time, this is really coming after, just generally speaking, a lot greater segment of white collar jobs. It's not
Yeah.
just, factory jobs, industrial jobs, unskilled sort of mechanical moving, part A to bin B. It's not so much that. This is really going after just a whole different swath. And between Copilot and ChatGPT to write code, the developers are, how do you learn how to become a developer if the easy development is just done by AI?
And that's
How
the
do you
exact
how do
same.
you
That's
get
the
good?
exact same thing for our industry, like you were
Yes.
saying before. When you and I got into the industry about a decade and some ago, even though we had a little bit of experience, a tangential experience before, we had to do the grunt work, right? We had to do the low hanging fruit. We had to do the $20 spots and maybe $30 for a pre-roll,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
And audiobooks for an embarrassingly low amount of money per finished hour. And
yeah.
that was the training ground. That was what was available to us to get better, to step up that ladder. And really where I'm seeing this, the greatest impact, the greatest first impact that this is going to be felt in our industry is in the lower entry level, I guess, for a better way of describing it, the entry level work that our industry and people who want into it depend on to be able to build skill, cut their teeth, build up a resume, build up a client list so that they can progress. And that's not concerning for me. Sorry about the double negative, but
It is.
you know,
It makes you wonder what will happen as the experienced people, as they age out of the industry, whether that's you and me, or there's a whole
right?
crop of people that have 10 to 15 or 20 years experience that won't be doing this in 10 or 15 years,
Yeah,
potentially. And so the people who have been only hearing AI voices for 10 or 15 years, will there be new voices? Because I do think we're going to get to the point that we will become exhausted or tired of it. I just think in the same way that booking travel, gosh, I wish I could have a travel agent,
right.
because booking travel is it's an
It's
awful experience.
it's
I
a
would really like to have.
nail pulling experience.
And so maybe it will come around again that there's somebody who will actually do Wikipedia or Expedia for me,
Yeah, right.
to do that. But I think it will. I think it will potentially come around for many things. And we see it. We see it with the younger people, that they are nostalgic for things in a way that I think you and I are not necessarily
Yeah,
have nostalgia. I don't have nostalgia for the 50s
no,
in the same way that I think that there's a generation of kids who were born after 2000 that are nostalgic for the 70s and 80s, in a way
yeah,
that they actually think that in many aspects that was better. And it's probably because they haven't lived their eye under the lens of social media and constant barrage. It was simpler. But
mhm,
I think that, the music was different, the television was different, there was a different pace to life, and maybe that will have an impact in the same way that you talked about artisan pickles. You watch enough
yeah,
YouTube, you see artisan woodcrafters or machinists where they could use tools of much more significant automation, but there's a joy in making the
yes,
thing,
yeah.
and you hate for those
No,
skills to get lost
totally agree. There's
fully.
there's a term, a Greek word called arete, and arete means the excellence in doing a thing. And
Right.
there's no AI algorithm on earth that's going to experience or provide arete, because it's simply generative. And
Right, right.
I like you kind of look at this as, and I'll speak on your behalf, everybody who's listening or watching, our hair's not on fire right now, and that would be significant for me. But really where I see this going, there are some good things as is always the case with the advent of a new technology, there are going to be good things that come out of this. And one of the things I was discussing with Professor Bryson was, AI has the ability, or the potential at least, to revolutionize adaptive technology for people with disabilities. And I have a really good friend of mine who I went to college with, who, I have use of one hand and partial of the other. My good friend is fully paralyzed and has a fantastic voice. Actually, if I could wheel him in front of a microphone, we could make great things happen. But the express reason why he did not pursue voice acting outside of college was that he couldn't do the editing.
Yeah.
He did not have, it would take him, he could, but it would literally take him 5 times what it takes me. I know, I'm prognosticating, but I'm certain that within a mere matter of months to a couple years, we're going to be able to take a Bear Stripe recording, feed in a reference track to an AI platform, and have it master it for us. And not only master it, but edit it. Tell it it's going to go to Amazon. It's going to need to pass ACX specs. I want moderate pacing, and I want the noise floor reduced to this with this RMS. And you feed it in there, and you go to the bathroom, and you come back, and it's probably been done by the time you left the room.
Yep.
I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing.
That progress will happen always. And you see there are corollary actions even in the tech world, right? Going back to when you and I were kids, it was punch cards or assembly, and those programmers were programming to the bare metal. And then there are ever higher languages, right? All of a sudden we had C, and oh my goodness, this is so much better than assembly. And then there was all of this stuff that happens. I think in many cases, you have developers right now that only know Python, that only know, these really extremely high level languages.
Yeah, JavaScript is arcane to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And they have no idea what's happening all the way back at the bare metal. Is that okay? Eventually, will that be lost? I don't know. I don't know. There's definitely there's a thing there where all of a sudden the institutional knowledge or the knowledge that we have as a people, that there will be no programmers who really know how that stuff happened. There will be ever fewer engineers who knew how to record to tape and knew why a compressor is a compressor and acts the way it does because the electrical circuitry, because it's all modeled.
Yeah.
Maybe that will lead to new and different, unusual kinds of innovation that we will have. Right now, I don't know what that is exactly. We think about everybody wants to model microphones, but they're vintage microphones.
Right.
There's musicians that want to have amplifiers and speaker cabinets modeled, but they're the old ones. There's all this other stuff where people want to model stuff that was. I don't know what in 20 years people will be modeling from this time, because there's ever less stuff.
I can't see anybody looking at me in 20 years and going, "Oh, I want to model that vintage old bastard." But at the same time, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the biggest growing record labels and producers on earth is Jack White. And if you look at what he did with Third Man Records, you go to Third Man. Actually, a really good friend of mine went about 2 years, just before the pandemic, and he emailed me saying, "You want to know what's so awesome about Third Man? It smells old. It's nothing about the sound, nothing about it. Smells so good. It smells like the stuff that we grew up with when we got that first Fender Twin, and it smelled old and electric-y, And I think that we will be experiencing some of that, and I do, again, want to reiterate, I feel that there's always going to be room for the human voice. I believe that there are going to be enough people that want that. We are going to have to take into consideration, though, that there's always going to be a segment of the buying public. And by buying public, I should rephrase that and say there's always going to be a segment of people who pay for voices, either by way of content creators or listeners, who don't care. They want the information. They want it at a cost-effective price point for them. And they're not going to care that voices are synthesized or artificial.
Yeah.
But there are always going to be people who do.
Mhm.
Where the concern for me comes is, how do we as an industry of independent, contractors, how do we navigate this influx of what invariably is going to be a lot of content creators and new content creators who come in? They have very limited budget. It might be a passion project that they're trying to blow up into something bigger. And, the attractiveness of generative AI voices. And, I sent you just the other day a video of a film that was made, what was it, like 3 years ago, right? And, we've got all these people squawking about AI can't act. AI doesn't have the that thing was crying. And I'll put a link to the video up here.
Yeah.
That happened 2 to 3 years ago. And by way of how technology grows, that's 5-year-old technology. That's not 11 labs. That was high quality acting going on with all the emotion and the modulation and the movement. I literally sat here staring slack-jawed at the screen. I was just, how are we as providers of voice talent going to differentiate ourselves and make ourselves value added? How are we going to convince people that your service is better than the absolute near instant gratification of going to ChatGPT, having it puke out the copy, taking that copy over to 11 labs, and literally within, I could do something. In my last video, I did it with the disclaimer that I'm encouraging people to use in their communications. That whole process took me less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes from, I need this piece of copy to do a voiceover, to, and I've got the voiceover now. How are we going to be value added? What are your thoughts on what you're going to be able to provide that AI can't?
I think it's. I mean, I know exactly what you mean. And I still think that at the moment, we still have the leg up as humans.
Yeah.
We can take direction. We can take notes, get notes to our performance, adapt and adjust. All of the platforms are still, yes, the voices are becoming more convincing as sonically, but they're still falling short on the acting. Even if you put in the high variability and you put it in, it's still falling short. And I think if you can do the markup or whatever it is to get that intonation and variability, if you're trying to get the listener to feel something specific, we as humans still are going to have the leg up on that.
Yeah.
If it's just to educate, to convey information, like industrial, I think so much of that is going to go away. But the ability for me to say something that's going to make you feel what I want you to feel, what I hope you will feel, I still think we've got a leg up on that. That's going to come down to our ability to be humans and act.
Right.
Because there is still that. And I think that's going to be the way that many of us differentiate, and still the way the young people, that are starting and they're like, well, should I think about this industry? I don't know. But you're gonna have to still be what the AI can't be yet.
Yeah. And that comes down to, really, in my mind, two things. Number one is, you can't look away on this anymore. As a person either in this industry or interested in this industry, this is something that you need to be actively tracking, because how many of us in the last 2 months alone have just literally been sat back in our chair reading the news going, holy crap, it can do that? Wow, that was fast. No, it wasn't fast. This has been building for a long time. Now we are at a point, and I'll link to the video up here too. We tend to think of growth as either logarithmic, where it grows and then it tops out and just kind of stabilizes. Or, again, as I said in one of my videos, thanks to COVID, we're now all really familiar with exponential growth, which is zoom, what this is, and this was really kernelized for me in a video that Tom Scott made that is also up here. This is by way of the graph. This is a sigmoid curve. It starts out really slow and behaves suddenly like it's exponential, but then it tops out at some point in the non-infinite future. And, Tom Scott used the example of where we are right now in his mind, and this I just thought was brilliant for my generation of people. We're at the Napster moment. We're at the Napster moment of Napster just debuted. A bunch of people who were mostly in Metallica lost their ever-loving minds over this, but then suddenly everything changed, and music was no longer tied or only available for physical purchase. And the first group of people who actually saw this as a good thing were the record labels, who went, oh, no, we know how we can monetize this. And, now what I say to other people is, when was the last time you went out and bought a CD? We don't really do that anymore. I mean, some of us do. And again, to all my vinyl nerd friends, I see you, but, now people subscribe to streaming platforms, and that's how you get your music, either commercial free or commercialized. And, really, we went from Napster to Spotify to Spotify dominance in less than a decade. So this is going to be a very rapid ascent, and it's going to make a lot of people very dizzy and very nauseous, and there are going to be casualties. Dr. Bryson had mentioned, people like the copywriters at newspapers. That's not really a profession anymore.
I actually think, you're. I've got a different take on that. I know the Tom Scott video that you're familiar with, and I know the sigmoid curve. Personally, I think we are still 100 miles from the Napster moment. I think, as I've thought about this stuff, I think we're at the invention of the synthesizer stage.
Dude, you're not making me feel very good.
Where a synthesizer could maybe replicate a bass, or a synthesizer could maybe replicate a piano, where we're at the very infancy of replicating what a voice can be, what a person can write, what a picture can generate. I think we're way back there. I think on this curve, we are at the very, very, very beginning.
We're at the Tubular Bells, Baba O'Reilly level of technological progression.
That game, that song Popcorn. If everybody, do you remember the song Popcorn?
Yes.
Right.
Thanks for that viral. That's going to wake me up in the middle of the night.
Oh, if you don't know the song Popcorn, but that was like one of the first hits where it was electronic, where it was synthesized.
Mm-hmm.
And we're using the word generative now. Back then, it was synthesized. You were replicating something that historically had only been drums, bass, guitar, keyboard, analog. You went to something that was. I don't think those were digital yet.
No,
but
it was still analog, but electronic.
There was a synthesis between. It wasn't physically somebody playing the instrument, and now you just sort of set it off, and it generated. In a sense, I think we're still back. I think we're still there, and I think I have no idea.
Right, and where I hate to come on the show here with two people that get looked up to sometimes and go, we don't know. We're along for the ride. It always kind of reminds me of the fortune in a Chinese cookie that says, "May you live in interesting times." If you do any research in Chinese culture and history, you understand that that's actually a curse and not a fortune.
Right.
But I guess.
We can either fight it. We can either fight it in the same way that other people. You could fight against Expedia, but it won. So we can either fight it or we can adapt to it.
That's it. It's
and I think so much of it, we're going to have to adapt, and part of what we have to do to adapt is still think about what it is can we do. what of these tools can we leverage to our advantage? I use AI tools to help me do my editing, right? If it's
Yeah,
Isotope creates an AI-based mouth declicker, I'm going to use that. I'm
I
not going to
want that.
fight against, I'm not going to fight against those
Exactly.
things.
And adapt or die is the thing.
Yeah.
And, you got two people here in the industry coming to you all saying, we don't know, but don't be scared. I think it's okay to be a little bit nervous right now, especially if you are considering getting into the industry. I mean, both you and I are going to be very upfront in saying that we don't know what's next. And we don't know what the full scope of ramifications of this change is going to be. But I think one of the things that we both can agree on is that things like coaching are going to be that much more important to you as you start out. When I was talking to Paul Schmidt, VO talent on the East Coast, he was saying his mantra is get good, get good, get good, get good. And really, we got to change this now, and it's got to be get good fast. It's got to be know if this is really the industry you want to step into. And a lot of that discovery really happens in coaching with people, getting put through your paces, taking critique and feeling what you can do differently and moving forward and growing and progressing instead of just doing it on your own, just playing it to your dog. It might be the better thing to invest right now. Don't worry about that $500 microphone. Take that $500 and buy a coaching package. And yes, I say that as a coach, and you're a coach too. And we're both perfectly willing to say, you don't got to pay for us. Just get it from somewhere because it's probably going to be the thing that makes a difference for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what goes along with that, the corollary to that is you're no longer, not that this was even true now, but we've seen the progression towards Mel Blanc was an actor. He
Yes,
walked
he
into a
was.
studio and there was somebody else practically in a lab coat on the other side of the glass who was twiddling the knobs, right?
Right.
But now you and I have probably, I don't know, a good 40% of what the audio engineer needed to do. We
Yeah.
know how to do.
Sure.
We know how to do the editing, we know how to do the mastering. So we've had to continually add more hats. I think the next generation will have to add yet more hats. Maybe they are also copywriters. Maybe they are also video editors or whatever it is that can impart the human touch on everything they do. We know that there's a body of work that's always going to be out there that's the lowest common denominator, and it's just get it out. And they want to get down to a button where they just press a button and get it out.
Yeah.
But in a world where there is creativity, I think because some of these tools have made our job easier, it diversifies what we actually have to get good at so that we can impart our humanity into this process.
Agreed.
So that we can show what we can do.
I agree. And, I think one of the other things to take into consideration with this phenomena is that this is going to make content creation faster. The iteration cycle is going to be reduced. And really what that implies is that I do believe there is room for people to step in, even though the voice might be spat out really fast. By sheer numbers of what the content stream is going to be, there's always going to be people that need help, that want a human being's opinion on what they're doing, what their project is. And that's something that we in the VO world at certain levels have a unique perspective on. We've done work for so many different companies, for so many different projects. And, at times we've heard back on metrics. We've heard back on the reception of our work and what worked and what didn't, and changes that we put in place in order to make it be more accessible to more people. That's what we're going to be able to season our offerings with, make us be more valuable as content creation partners. Because as Dr. Bryson mentioned in the interview, there's always going to be, at the upper levels of decision making, people who want to just throw this over to somebody they trust and say, look, you've helped me with this thing before. That was a big success. Here's what we're doing now. What are your thoughts? And AI is not going to be able to give you thoughts. And AI is not going to be able to envision or ideate into the future. And Those are things that are going to be important. But one of the other things that's really going to be important is your demo as a beginning talent is now more important than ever. And watch this tie-in, bro. And you and Anthony Pica are doing something new right now. I want you to take a minute and tell everybody about the new offering that you guys are going to be putting out in the very near future, because I think this is, if there's ever a time for it, this is it.
Well, we have a webinar on putting together your first demo using Reaper, a DIY demo. And really, our intention with creation of that webinar is to help people get better at the wider gamut of skills that you need to do, because while there may not yet be a real replacement for the pro level demo,
no, I don't think there is.
But you and I both know that so many of the clients we work for have a higher expectation of what we can produce. They want us to be able to understand music beds and making them fit in the mix and equalizing so that our voice cuts through, so that we can edit and put these things together more than just walking into a studio, saying our lines, and then jetting. So many of what we can offer is a better package of doing those whole things. And so a demo, since everybody is interested in demos, wants to create it, it's a good sort of object lesson in how to create something that represents what you can do.
Yeah, it's the old piano box phenomena of being a carpenter. One of your first tasks as a journeyman carpenter was to build your toolbox.
You got to make your toolbox, right?
Exactly. And everywhere you went, somebody who was considering having you do work can look at the quality of that. And not only that, and this is a point for humanity again, you as the artisan have the ability to look back at that box and see history and see the progression of your skill and your talent and your artistry. And so it serves multiple purposes, just like your demo should. But I wanted to include that because, again, I think that it's a good time for people to either learn how to do it themselves now or brush up on their skills. And I want people to understand that there are still options available to them in the here and now by this. What's the URL and the sign up and the date and time and all that business for that? Or is that it hasn't happened yet? Is that correct?
It happens on Saturday.
On this Saturday. Well,
this coming Saturday.
I'm pumping this thing out tomorrow. So
on the 25th in the afternoon, and you can get there through. We'll put a link. It's a long Zoom link in the description, but I'll have a link for you. So if you are interested in learning how to use the DAW, the object will be a demo, and that's what we hope to come out with. But I'm going to teach you a whole bunch of stuff about how to get better at my DAW of choice, which is Reaper, because it's inexpensive and super, super capable. We're going to use that as the learning environment, and hopefully it's valuable.
Look, if it's anything like anything else that you've done in the past, Mike, it is definitely valuable. But I think it's a point to be made, though, that you're right. This, and nor am I implying that you're offering is as good as a pro demo. Now, for the people out there listening or watching us right now, if you're in the mid to upper mid tiers of your career, if you've been doing it like we have for about 10 years or so, it might very seriously be time to consider taking that next step into buying or having a professional demo does. And I know that you, on one of your next interview shows on your channel, you will be talking with our good friend Chuck from VO Buzz Weekly, Chuck Duran. And Chuck is an absolute, aside from the fact that he is a whirlwind of positive energy at a time when you probably could use some, he's also an absolutely phenomenal producer.
He is unbelievable at it. Unbelievable at it. It's a real privilege to speak with Chuck and to just pick his brain about that. And it's interesting. I think he sort of correlates a lot of what we're talking about, is we all have to get better at this. Many of the demos he's doing are, you got to remote in. And if you don't know how to remote into his studio, if you don't have a good enough studio at home, you got to get good fast so that you can be matching or exceeding what the AI sound quality can be. So there's so much that we need to learn. And that's, my webinar will be, learning one aspect of it. What Chuck does will be learning another, but there's nothing that can replace having a real director, somebody
No.
with a fresh set of ears who really knows how to get the best performance out of you so that you can best represent yourself. I think having a pro demo is still super, super critical.
I agree. And, I say that as a person who produces demos for other people. I'm always very clear in saying, this is a demo for a particular career level. And when you're ready to step up to that next level, come talk to me again. We'll agree that maybe you are, because I don't want anybody spending that money unless they're at the stage where the chances of it benefiting them outweigh the amount of money that's going out the door.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, to wrap up, I think what I want to ask you is, what do you see yourself in your business? And honestly, you can also throw in, we're both content creators for YouTube, so you can take that into consideration as well. What do you see yourself doing in the rest of 23? What do you see yourself doing differently, if anything?
Doing differently in response to this, I think what I will continue to do, what I've done previously, is you pay attention. You never really get to rest. So paying attention to where other industries are going, what's happening in the world, will often inform on a more micro level what you need to do with yourself. So if you're not paying attention to technology beyond like Instagram,
Right.
you got to try and find out what else is happening in the world, because there are often canaries in other coal mines that can inform what's happening. So it's really trying to pay attention and then just continue to hone my craft. I want to get better at what I'm doing. I don't think I'm out of work this year.
Right. No,
I don't think I'm
agree.
out of work next year.
Nope.
I think there will always be, as we've said, there will be companies who want to hire humans. There will be companies that want to do what we want to do, that want to do what am I trying to say? That want to deal with a person, that they're not getting what they need out of the machine, and they want whatever that human touch is. And I hope they'll continue to come to me. And I hope it's because I'm good at what I do, because I practice. Just like if I was a musician, I continue to practice. I practice my instrument. I practice my production quality. I practice. So I can just hopefully get a little bit better.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where there is, in voiceover, there is no, I made it. It's always,
you're not done.
I'm
not done until you retire.
I'm making it, Mike, buddy, thanks again for jumping in with us. It's a weird time, but
it's my pleasure.
Hopefully people like you and I are going to come out of this unscathed, but at the same time, again, we're both telling you, we don't know. But until next time, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Andrew Scott. That, of course, is Mike Delgaudio, and you've been at Booth to Booth. See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
From the beautiful Pacific Northwest, this has been Booth to Booth with Andrew Scott. Booth to Booth is a narrowband broadcast network production in association with AndrewScottMedia.com. Andrew Scott, executive producer. Our theme music was written and produced by Ron Kajawa. Website design and maintenance by Vacano Creative. Christopher Vacano, webmaster. Available at VacanoCreative.com. Audio and video production by Andrew Scott. Available at AndrewScottMedia.com. Got topic ideas, questions, or comments for the show? Email us at patchin@booth2booth.com or by simply clicking the link in the description. On behalf of host Andrew Scott, I'm Eric Murray. From our booth to yours, thanks for joining us. See you next time on Booth to Booth.
Out. Yeah, good. Good again,
Sorry,
Mike.
my dog is like right at the door. She's like, "Oh, I want to come in,
Dad." No, that's cute. I heard the little whistling, and I was like, It's either a dog or the furnace.
Yeah, it's the dog.
And then it was no, that's good. That's good.
I'm gonna go. Let me let her in so she doesn't really. Start barking.
Do
Hold on,
please, please.
Second. She knows I keep little biscuits right here.
Oh,
take
no
that and
joke.
go away from me for now.
So, if anything, you just gave me B-roll for an Easter egg at the end of the show. So okay.
NBBN.
The Narrowband Broadcast Network.
The focus is on you.